Welcome back to the Sacred Arts channel, where we talk about all things from the sacred to the practical. I'm very excited for our guest today because we are going to be talking about panic disorders and anxiety disorders. Emerson Souza,
Souza, depends
Souza.
where you live.
Emerson Souza is an organizational psychologist by profession, serving as a government consultant, specializing in human capital, human centered design, and tech integration and development. Renowned for his insatiable curiosity and deep fascination with individuals, he deliberately pursued education across 5 different colleges to expand his exposure to diverse personalities. This passion led him to launch a podcast titled Here's Some Evil, dedicated to engaging conversations with intriguing, unconventional, knowledgeable, and contentious figures. Regardless of who we are in this world, panic attacks can affect everyone when we are in the thick of it. Having a panic attack can feel unsurmountable. And today we have a very special guest that's going to talk about his experience with this disorder and how he is coping with it today. Welcome, Emerson.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. It's something that not a lot of us talk about and a lot of us do experience. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with panic disorder and how it manifested for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The what's really interesting about my case is that so it started when I was about 33 years old. So I'm 35 now. I'm turning 36 in about a month or so. And prior to that, I would say that for lack of a better way of saying it, I feel like I always skated through my early adulthood through my 20s. It felt relatively easy. School was fun. Even when I was in graduate school, it was fun. Landing jobs was easy, relatively easy for me. I don't know. I just felt like I didn't really have that many stressors in life. I did have probably some relatively severe childhood trauma that I kind of put on the back burner.
Mm.
But because my late into my teens and early 20s and late 20s felt so fun and easy that I think that I kind of just dismissed those things for a long time. And so then eventually I started having certain health issues, and I didn't think it was that bad. I started having some GI issues, and it was, like I said, it wasn't anything too crazy. It was I was more sensitive to certain foods. So I try to kind of just mitigate it by trying to learn about what I can and can't eat. And I kind of just I once again just put that on the back burner. I was just like, oh, there's certain foods that I can't eat. I just won't I won't mess with those. And then as the years kind of went on, the GI issues got worse and worse. And once again, wasn't looking into it. I was just like, I was never adverse to going to seeking any type of medical attention or anything like that. I was an athlete my entire life. My only time that I was ever in the hospital or anything like that was because of injuries, and even then it was sometimes not even that crazy. Like broken bones and dislocated shoulders and whatnot, but it wasn't anything super grave. But then, yeah, so then I didn't look into it. I just tried to kind of to mitigate it myself. And then it got bad enough where I was going to the bathroom so often
Mm.
that I don't know. I just wasn't paying attention to it. I just was trying. I was like, oh, this is like a thing that happens when you're older, like whatever. I was just kind of attributing to that, and I was like, whatever. Like this is what happens. Yeah, it's like okay. Um, and then um, and then finally, like life started happening to me. Whereas like I said, even though I was experiencing life, it just never really felt that difficult for me. Like I said, school was relatively easy, work was relatively easy. Like, yeah, there was like some of the stressors, but I was having a ton of fun. I was out with friends a lot. I was meeting people on a constant basis. It was great. It was, like I said, it was great. But then, so then things started happening really fast at a certain point in time where I started advancing in my career. There's getting the promotions, and then and then you get I'm Latin American, right? So my family's from Brazil, and then there's that kind of like cultural pressure of like, hey, like you know, you're just kind of like out and partying with friends and not really doing anything substantial with your life. Like, you know, I had my cousins were married and, you know, like owned property and owned homes and everything. And so a lot of things were happening. I was in a relationship, and it was a long-term relationship at that point, and it wasn't going so well. And I was trying to, I was trying to fight through the bad times with this person, and hoping that we could kind of just work things out. And you know, like, because at some point I thought this was going to be the person that I marry, yada yada yada. Um, and then things were going really badly at work. You know, it was just like all of these things like started happening at what felt like at the same time. And I wasn't doing, like I said, I wasn't doing, the main thing here is that I wasn't doing anything about it. I was having health issues. I was unhappy with my romantic relationship. I was unhappy with my employment, my occupation. And then a lot of the things familial wise started coming up too. And I started having these like horrible nightmares about because my parents separated when I was 25, but it was 20 years of a very, very toxic relationship between my parents. And a lot of the horrible things started coming up with that. So I wasn't going to therapy. I wasn't seeking a doctor. And then I remember when I was looking for an engagement ring for my ex-partner, I was just out on a walk. I was like on my phone, like certain, like, you know, I remember I was calling a friend and I was like, hey, where did you get your engagement ring and everything? And so he was telling me some websites that he did some research on. I was like, great. So I finally you know, got on a couple of websites, and in the middle of this walk, I started having this feeling that I've never felt before. Like I said, 33 years old, never even thought that I was ever an anxious person. You know, I never suffered with any type of social anxiety, any type of you know, no anxiety attachment issues that I've ever had. It just never felt like it would be something that I would look into. Sorry, I'm giving you a super long-winded response.
No, this is great. I think it's so relatable, and I love the details. Please go
Sure,
on.
sure. But yeah, and then I was just walking. You know, I think I might have been taking. Yeah, I think I was walking my landlord's dog, something that I've done, you know, hundreds of times at that point. And while they were out of town, and something came over me where I couldn't explain it then. It's very hard for me to even to explain it now.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what is this? And for a second, you know, obviously the first, you know, the hyperventilating, and then like the pressure on my abdomen, my chest, and then I had this overwhelming feeling in my head that was the worst part. It just felt like something was grabbing my brain and just squeezing it. Because and why I find it so difficult to explain is because it's never painful, but there's this overwhelming sensation that something really, really bad is happening to your body.
Hmm.
Um, and so I didn't know what to do. Um, and so I rushed home at the time. My insurance company, I remember I called 911 first. And so I was like, I might be having a heart attack or a stroke. I was like, I have no idea what's going on with me. Like something really bad is happening with me. And then they were asking me all these, you know, questions and everything. They're like, do you want us to send an EMS? I'm like, absolutely. Like I have great insurance. I have a good, like, this is gonna just send whoever, you know, like I was just like, whatever. And then so while they're on their way, I called my insurance company because they had a behavioral health. And so I recently at the time had a friend who was having a bout with schizophrenia. And
Hmm.
so I studied psychology. I'm profoundly passionate about the area of psychology. And so I, for a split second, I was like, I wonder if this is like some sort of mental breakdown that I'm having. And so I called the behavioral health department within my insurance company, and I explained the exact same symptoms. And by coincidence, because I went to my general physician maybe like 6 months prior, because I told him I was having these which is a hilarious foreshadowing into what actually happened. But I was like, I'm starting to have these like weird feelings about flying, something that never happened ever in my life. Yeah, I've flown. I mean, I feel like at this point thousands of times in my life. Like
Yeah.
maybe not that much, but I've flown so much, so many times in my life. And I told him I was like, I don't know what's going on. I was like, I just have this weird feeling like of nervousness before flying. He was like, you know what? I'll prescribe you. He gave me 10 like these tiny little capsules of Xanax. They're like 0.25. He was like, take one. If you need to take a second one, take a second one. And so I would take literally like I think half of one. Like just it would do nothing. If anything, it was very comforting. Just didn't know that I took a little bit. And so when I called the behavioral health, they were like, "Do you still have the Xanax?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have, I have like 8.5 more pills." And they're like, "Take one. You might be having an anxiety attack." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So then I ended up taking one. By the time EMS gets there, I called my parents. My parents came over, and then by the time EMS came, obviously the Xanax had kicked in. I was relaxed and I was perfectly fine. And so then yeah, I was just like, oh, I guess maybe it was an anxiety attack. They check my vitals and everything. And I was like, okay, well, that was weird. And so that was my first time ever having like my first actual anxiety attack episode. And then after it was one of those, the dam broke. And then I was having an anxiety attack every single 3 days. And then it was nonstop and it was only getting progressively worse. Yeah.
Whoa.
So the first time that it happened, it was just like kind of weird. I was shaken up, and then it got so bad that I ended up in the hospital because I there's this paranoia that set that I was convinced that I was deeply ill with some sort of cancer or tumor. So then I started having kind of like, I wouldn't say a psychotic episode, but it was a very, very harsh paranoia episode. And I was just convinced I either have like Crohn's disease or I have a tumor in my brain. Like nothing made sense. I was like, there's no reason for me to feel this way. I've always thought I've handled pressure and stress. You know, like I said, I did competitive soccer at the second highest level in the States, as you know, as far as in college. And yeah, it just never. So I was like, this has to be something else. But yeah, and then eventually I ended up seeing a therapist because, and I can get into it too if you want me to, but I started developing some pretty hardcore phobias.
Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible how, not incredible, but kind of scary how much it escalated so quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about like what did you learn from that experience? Like how were you able to mitigate your anxiety attacks or panic attacks?
So in the beginning, I was, I have no problem admitting this. I leaned pretty heavy on the Xanax, because I never, as I mentioned before, I never had an issue with anxiety prior, so I never had the skills or the tool set for any type of coping mechanisms. So I never learned about any breathing techniques. I never ever practiced in meditation. Anything that's associated with aiding in the in whenever somebody is having an episode. I was not familiar with any of those things. My level of psychology that I've studied was it was the BS level, which was more. I studied more like on the neuro side of things. And then I went
Mhm.
in grad school. I completely did a 180, and I had studied business psychology. So I was very far removed with the entire DSM-4 then DSM-5 now. But and so yeah, I I just was leaning on drugs, to be honest. And then but the thing is, it's a very, very small band-aid for a short amount of for a
Yeah.
short period of time. And because when it wears off, it just comes right back, right?
Oof. Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually when I went to therapy, because then I finally started going to therapy, and then I was going twice a week actually, because I developed what's called agoraphobia, which is essentially
Mm,
the fear of kind of like leaving your own domicile because you just think you're gonna have a panic attack like every second of your life.
hmm.
Um, so so in therapy is the first time that I received any type of skill or tools to use. And that's when I learned about breathing methods. That's when I learned about meditation, exercise. I learned exercise is a great thing for people with anxiety. So that's the first time that I started kind of like using certain techniques. Yoga was a big thing for me because there was, at the end of the day, doing like 10 minutes of yoga, whatever the science is, but it's like apparently it's like you're kind of just like relieving that stress at the end of the
Yeah.
day. So that was huge for me. And but it was a long road. Um, and and I will say that even when I was using these techniques, that I was still kind of bring the Xanax around me as a security blanket, right? um and it's been about 2.5 years, like kind of like working in progress. Still, I would say it's still very much like in the middle of working through whatever that I'm going through right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Have you been able to pinpoint like what has been the cause of the anxiety? Is it a bunch of different events? Is it one huge event that you maybe didn't look at? Like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey there?
Sure. So it's what I've learned is that nothing's for sure, but
Yeah.
what's kind of like the data brings us is that that it's a culmination of things, because like I mentioned before, like the dam broke at essentially an inopportune time. So it was a bunch of things that piled on. You know what I mean? I felt like if it was just the GI issues that I was having, I would have probably been able to handle that a lot easier. If it was just that. If it was just my relationship with my ex, then I could have just handled that. If it was just my issues with work, I probably could have handled that. Who knows? Obviously, it's pure speculation. But it felt like because there were so many things that, because I've handled many stressors in the past, um, but it was probably just one thing that just kept stacking on top of one and then another and then another, that there was an inevitable straw that broke the camel's back. And that's what I think happened, because like I said before, like um I I know I keep bringing this back to being playing soccer, but it's just that was, if there was the most stressful time in my life at
Yeah.
prior to that, was probably playing collegiate soccer. It was just like it was the pressures of winning, the pressures of keeping your grades up to make sure that you play, you have to play the sport. There was just so many things about being a student athlete. And then there's a social aspect as well. Like you needed,
Hmm.
like obviously as much as you needed to stay in shape and everything, like you also are kind of expected to join your team out for drinks and go to parties and socialize and whatnot. So but all of that for me felt perfectly fine. And so and then like I said, going to grad school, that was, it was stressful, but never did I feel like I was gonna have a full-blown anxiety attack or anything like that. Finding jobs, working for big consulting firms, none of it really felt like it was too bad of stress. But then you bring it all together, you pile it on. And like I said, there was all those things that were happening. And then finally the trauma of my childhood finally crept in too.
Mm.
So that finally came up. And I would say that's probably the straw. You know what I mean? Like I was dealing with all of those things that I was dealing with. I was probably somewhat handling it to an extent. And then finally, when I started thinking back about my childhood, about certain things that I essentially regressed in my memory, when those things started to surface, then I think I spiraled into this deep kind of anxiety hole that I found myself in.
Yeah, talk about dark night of the soul. It sounds like you really went through it, not just like emotionally, but physically as well. And it sounds, really scary when you're not able to kind of control that. So I can totally see why one would develop agoraphobia, because you just never know when it's going to onset. So you did mention developing some phobias during, this whole thing. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit on those phobias and how did they affect you?
Yeah. It's a really bizarre thing that happened to me, especially because I'm still in the middle of it now. So I started developing phobias of things that I've done either hundreds or thousands of times. Um, so the first thing that came about was the agoraphobia. So after I was hospitalized, I essentially trapped myself in my own apartment for about 3 weeks. Didn't leave once. I was so fearful of leaving my own apartment that I became kidnapped by the phobia. It was truly awful. It wasn't until I started doing those practices, those tools that I had mentioned before, as far as breathing, meditation, yoga, and exercising, that I got out of it. But that was the first one that came about. And then I developed pretty hardcore claustrophobia.
Mm.
So um, I um, I started getting I found myself getting panic attacks or anxiety attacks when I would be either if I was inside of a car that was stuck in traffic, if I was on a train, if I was on a plane, like anything that was in an enclosed environment. I found myself being fearful of this thing that I was, like I said, so accustomed to. Um, and yeah, those are yeah, claustrophobia, agoraphobia, and then a fear of heights. All of a sudden, this thing, I remember in my 20s trying to find friends to go skydiving with me, and then now it's like I have to basically sedate myself in order to get on an airplane before flying now. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting how fast, life changes when something like this onsets. Do you feel like these alternative methods or like the therapy that you're on is helping you improve with with the panic disorders and anxiety? And then if so, like what is your recommendation in terms of like finding the right alternative methods to be able to deal with this?
I think I might have read 10 different, stress relief books or
Mhm.
just like, and I probably have gone on a collective 100 hours worth of YouTube rabbit holes of mitigating anxiety and things like that. So, I will say, especially with this podcast, I've also interviewed ketamine, therapists. Um, so my whole thing was I've never um I've never taken any type of um like SSRIs or
Mhm.
antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. So my goal was to try to not do that, because in my research that I've done, also one of my best friends, essentially she's a psychologist in pharmacology, and she was telling me that SSRIs are their efficacy rate is relatively low,
Mhm.
and they also have some unusual side effects that have to relate to either your mood, your personality. They turn some people into kind of like a zombie like state, and I find myself to have a relatively bubbly personality, and I feel like one of the reasons that I am able to either make friends or maintain friends is because of that. And I just feel like I couldn't, there's no amount of anxiety that could make me want to change that about me. Um, so for the longest time, I avoided the drugs. Obviously, there was the Xanax, but the Xanax is very short term, right? Um, so I would, like I said, it was a lot of research and a lot of recommendations from a variety of therapists too. I started seeing one therapist, and then I was like, you know what, like I needed something a little bit more specific to anxiety, so I went to another therapist, and then I ended up moving. Then I started traveling, and so I would see different therapists in different states that I was in. Then I eventually landed myself in San Francisco, and I had a therapist there for a year. Um, and so yeah, it was basically listening to my therapist. I think that was like a huge one. I think another thing that I learned was making sure that not to sound so super California, but that you vibe with your therapist. Like that you should, like, you have the option to switch and no therapist should be offended if you decide to not go with them. It's the same thing. Like if you don't dig your dentist, if you don't dig your, your kid's pediatrician, or if you don't, or your physician, whatever it may be, um, you want to have that relationship if it's because it's such an interpersonal and personal relationship. And so, um, so that was, I wanted somebody who really understood where I was coming from, and was actively listening, actively asking questions, and was engaging. Because I've had some therapists that really just listen. There's nothing wrong with that for some people if they just want to talk and talk. But it's not my preferred therapy style. So yeah, it was a lot of that. It was a lot of putting what they say into practice. And then yeah, and then probably a few other things that I, like that they didn't recommend that I looked into. Like cold therapy was one that I found.
Mm.
So I ended up getting an ice bath, and then doing that horrible dunking, cold plunge every once in a while. So yeah, it was a lot of that. It was a lot of listening to my therapist, and then some other kind of alternatives that I eventually looked online from.
Yeah, listening to your story and some of the alternative methods, it sounds like it's all about being true to who you are, and being not just like in the present moment, because your original story, like the situation you were in, it just sounded like you were avoiding a lot of what you were actually feeling, right? In the relationship that you were in, and your relationship with your parents, and the job, and all of that thing, and all of those things, and just trying to handle it in the old strategies that you've always had, which you obviously got from like being competitive in sports, which I totally understand. That like people that have been competitive in sports, even at a collegiate level, um there is a certain personality, there is a certain type of way that you have to be to like keep up, your appearance, your the way that you bond with the team, and all that good stuff, everything that you mentioned before. And I think a lot of that does carry into the way that we handle ourselves in our personal lives, and sometimes that's not true to who we are, and we kind of have to kind of wipe that slate clean and figure out, okay, who am I? Who do I want to be moving forward? And sometimes these events happen in onset. Obviously, there's also other, mental, like hormone things, and physical things that happen. But it does sound like you had like this dark night of the soul, and kind of hit the reset button on like, okay, let me go inward and kind of figure myself out.
Sure. Yeah, it was um there avoidance is a huge thing. It's the most perfect word to describe what I was doing. It's really hard to come when I think regardless of where you're at in life, it's really hard to come to terms with something, especially something mental that's happening to you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like I'm not saying that cancer is better. So it's like if you have like if you have something like that, right? Something that's a cancer, that's like a physical thing that there's almost like a playbook on how to address it, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
you have to go to a doctor, you might have to get chemo, you might have to get surgery, right? And so like even though it's horrible and there's like obviously like there's death that's involved, it's like it's a little bit more, it's concrete. Whereas like
Yeah.
when it's something mental, there's it's not the 1920s where you just lobotomize somebody, right? It's like it's there's really no there's certain things that I know that people can go in for as far as like Tourette's or something like that, right?
Yeah.
There's like certain things, but when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to depression, there's no surgery, right?
It's
Um
inner work.
it's
Yeah.
exactly. So I when so when it was happening, I was just like, it was kind of like a snap out of it, kind of hit your forehead, snap out of it kind of thing. And also, I was never anybody. I was never someone who just kind of was so outward with my emotions or anything like that. And and I when it started happening, if your friends have never known you to be that person, to all of a sudden come out with this weird thing that's happening to you, my biggest fear was I would be a burden to my friends and
Mm.
in my friend group or in family members. And I started avoiding doing things with them because I didn't want to be that guy that has to, kind of change things around so people can cater to my needs. And so that's goes back to the avoidance thing. It's just like, oh, I'm gonna we're what I should have done at the beginning is be like, hey, like I'm going through something, you know, if you can support me, or if you can at least just like bear with me while I'm going through something, it would be really, really helpful. Whereas just like I just bottled it in and just kept, trying to just wish it away. And then
Hmm.
and then it didn't, of course, like I said, it just manifested into something much worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, how has your personal perception of like mental health, even, somebody that studied, has a bachelor's and whatnot in psychology, how has it changed your perception on mental health and self-care since you've gotten this diagnosis?
Sure. Um, so I I've always been a proponent of seeking some sort of mental health care. Always, always. If I wish it was more prevalently available. I wish that more people sought it out. I know there's a lot of people in my family that suffer from a lot of different mental issues that don't seek help. So I've always been a proponent, but the thing is, I never thought I needed it. Until recently. Whereas what I've learned from this is that if I was going to therapy, even if I was going to therapy either once a month or once every 6 months for a checkup, right? Something like that. I could have probably avoided this, right? If I went to when I, 6 years ago, if I was like, yeah, I'm just feeling weirdly weird with like, or not 6 years, sorry, 3 years ago, if I started mentioning, yeah, I don't know, I get planes for whatever reason, like, oh, you know what, like, okay, let's talk about your symptoms. This might be like an anxiety thing. Let's like, what are the stressors going on in your life? This might not have anything to do with heights or enclosed spaces. This might
Hmm.
be a deeper issue, right? So, um, if I have any message to anyone, it goes back to that take care of yourself early on. And if you feel like if there's any reason um, that any reason at all where you even question if you should go seek any type of professional help, then the answer is you should go see somebody professionally for sure.
Hmm.
Because I remember at some point I questioned it, but it was like I said, there's a tiny bit of the machismo that lays dormant in me and a lot of other men, where I was just like, come on, man, like you're fine. Like it was just like whatever. Like
Hmm.
go play soccer or go have a drink with friends. Like this will pass. And I didn't take care of myself. So the way that I approach mental health in general is just that the same way that I approach staying healthy physically, right? It's like obviously like I'm not like it would be really bad for me and most people if I was eating 12 donuts a day, right? It's like and not going to the gym and having like a sedentary lifestyle. Like that wouldn't be good for, like I said, me and most people, probably the 99th percentile. But like so same thing. It's just like you should as like you exercise your body or at least maintain your body to avoid the ailments like cancer, to avoid heart disease and things like that, diabetes, etc. Then you should actively work on your brain as well. And so, like I said, doing something where, you know, if it's even if you start off journaling, I learned that like that when it comes to mental health, it's not you don't just have to see a therapist. It's a great step into bettering yourself. But there's certain things that you can do where you're sending yourself voice notes, you're journaling. I talked to this one guy where he sends his friends these like 30-second clips just telling his friends how much he loves them and how
Hmm.
he is for them. And I thought, yeah, exactly. So, and I thought that was so beautiful and wonderful. And I remember I did that once. I was just like, why not? And my friends were like, what the hell is this? But it was, but some of them were like, this is fantastic. Like, oh my god, like I love you too, bro. Like this is great. And there's no skin off my back, you know. It was just fun, and now my friends will either use it against me one day, like or they'll just be forever appreciative, and either is funny for me, so or is great for me. But so yeah, so I I it's like when it's like I knew it was important, and then I found out how really important it is.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I said, it's something that everyone, I feel like, literally everyone, I can't imagine a single person in this world that wouldn't benefit from at least addressing mental health issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you probably learned this in school as well, but when I was doing my bachelor's in psychology, they always talk about, or even my master's, even, they always talk about how when you avoid and stuff things down, it will manifest physically some way and somehow. And so, I mean, I applaud you for coming on here and telling your story, because I think that that's another form of healing by telling your story and sharing it with people and voicing it, that it relieves it from the body, and people see you. And I don't know, I think that therapy is so healing, because you have that opportunity to talk about what's happening and talk about how we're feeling, and what the situation is like. Today's video is sponsored by BU Renewed, owned by Heidi Bayer.
It's BU Renewed has three supplement systems. We have the Stay Sharp system, and everything is a set. So we have a morning formula, which is stage 1. We have an evening formula, and everything is designed. They're brain supplements, and they're designed to help with focus, clarity, brain fog, memory. Everything is combined in here. So when you are on the program, when you have a subscription, when you just buy the product and you use it, the outcome is outstanding as far as giving you greater clarity to know how you want it and how you can be the most productive in your day. So we have the well-being system, and our well-being system, we have our stage 1, which is the morning formula, and it's our stress support system. And then our stage 2 is our evening formula, which is the calm, kind of your sleep, getting the best rest. It's your reset. So all of this together is our, everything about anti-stress, anti-anxiety, helping to make you really feel the best that you can feel on a daily basis. All of the ingredients are organic, they're handpicked, and they're all listed on the website as well, so you can check. Everything is proprietary. It's all laid out. There are no hidden ingredients. Herbs are the finest. The vitamins are the finest, and the minerals as well. We have one more system, which is called the Age Well system. Age Well is that we have the morning formula, which is for mobility, joint, helping you to really be, kind of self-support, which is really big for me. And our evening formula, which is vitality, energy, focus, and again, mobility and joints. So all of it is related to the body and to the spirit. So that's what I love about each and every system. Our products are really based on helping, and they work. And it's just everything that aligns you with your day to support your daily practice in what you eat, what you put into your body, what you do physically to help, whether it's yoga, whether it's walking or hiking. It's just a wonderful balance of all of who we are.
Go to burenewed.com today to get your first system and use code SACREDARTS20. Also, like, subscribe, and comment down below for a chance to win your first system today.
Yeah. Talking, for me, sometimes I think I talk too much, but I talking is so big. It's so helpful. Um, I, uh, uh, that's another thing that I've essentially been trying to spread the word is A, don't hold it in to like actually talk to people, and then B, see if you can find like-minded people. Because one of the things that I found super helpful, I remember one of my best friends, her name is Courtney. When I eventually told her about what I was going through, she told me about what she was going through, and both of us had no idea that we were essentially going through very similar ailments. Not the personal issues were different, but the anxiety paralleled each other.
Mm.
And same thing with another friend of mine, Sarah. There's just like these people in my life now, because I've opened up, that now there's this mutual exchange where we can lean on each other for anything that's problematic, both physically, emotionally, personally, occupationally, whatever it may be. So when you open up to people, you open up a network of support, and I think that's so wildly beneficial for people. And I think that people just, and because I suffer from it, like I said, I've already mentioned this, but like it's if you're a burden to a friend, and I don't think that's a good friend of
No,
yours, right? So
exactly.
if you have a friend that tells you that they don't have time for your issues or something like that, then that's not, sure, keep them as a friend, but that's not going to be like someone who's a good friend who can support you through tough times, right? And then you shouldn't reciprocate it as well. But find the people that in your network that do have the time, and not because they don't have anything to do, but because they are willing to be an empathetic participant in your life. And so, yeah, I mean, talking to other people outside of like the professional realm, it was huge for me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Can you tell us, where can people find you, follow you? Where can they check out your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast name is Hear Some Evil. You mentioned in the beginning of the show, or the episode. Yeah, they can find me on basically all streaming services: Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify. Um, it's and don't be thrown off by the name. Evil has nothing to do with it. It's more of kind of like a play on words. It's more of like a storytelling slash kind of, hey, let's have a conversation about anything kind of podcast. My Instagram is Here's Some Evil Podcast. And yeah, I'm not great at marketing myself, but that's they can find me on those two things. And I have like a link posted on my Instagram if people want to check it out.
Awesome. And I will link all of those down below. I was on Hear Some Evil, and I will link my podcast or that episode down below as well. Thank you all for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Let us know about what's going on if you're having anxiety attacks, and like and subscribe.
Cool. Thank you so much.